Ladies and gentlemen, let me ask you a question. What happens when the world's most trusted currency becomes the world's biggest liability? That is the story of the US dollar today. For decades, Americans have lived under the illusion that the dollar is unshakable, that our debts can rise forever, and that printing money comes without consequence. But history teaches us a hard truth. No empire, no currency, no economic power can defy reality forever. The downfall of the US dollar is not a possibility, it is an inevitability, and the signs are flashing red. Let me ask you something. If printing money created wealth, why has no nation in history ever succeeded by simply running its printing presses day and night? Why did empires with vast resources collapse under the weight of their own inflated currencies? The answer is simple. Prosperity cannot be manufactured out of thin air. Prosperity is not ink on paper or digits on a Federal Reserve balance sheet. It is the product of hard work, innovation, savings, investment, and trust. Yet we live in a time where the illusion has been sold to us that money equals wealth. And let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that illusion is about to shatter. Printing money is like giving a starving man a picture of food. It might look comforting for a moment, but it does nothing to satisfy the hunger. The Federal Reserve and our government believe that prosperity can be conjured by flooding the economy with dollars. They think if they hand out stimulus checks, keep interest rates near zero, and promise endless bailouts, the nation will somehow grow stronger. But what they are really doing is feeding an addiction, a deadly addiction to easy money. And like every addiction, it feels good at first, but it destroys you in the end. What makes a nation wealthy is not the number of dollars in circulation, but the value those dollars represent. Real value comes from production. When people work, when businesses innovate, when savings are invested into tools, factories, technology, and ideas that create more goods and services for society. That is prosperity. That is wealth. A farmer who plants seeds and harvests crops is building prosperity. A factory that manufactures cars and sells them worldwide is building prosperity. But when the government prints dollars without any increase in real production, those dollars are chasing the same limited supply of goods. The result is inevitable prices rise, purchasing power falls, and the very currency people trust is debased. Imagine if you could become rich simply by photocopying dollar bills in your basement. Would that make you wealthier? Of course not. It would make the currency worthless, and you'd soon find yourself unable to buy even a loaf of bread. That is what nations have done for centuries, from Weimar Germany to modern-day Venezuela. Every time leaders promised prosperity through printing, and every time they delivered poverty, chaos, and collapse. The United States is no exception. We are not immune to economic laws simply because we've been powerful. Gravity pulls down even the mightiest empire when it ignores reality. Here is what I want you to remember. Prosperity is earned, not printed. When we save, we build a foundation. When we invest, we fuel growth. When we produce, we strengthen the economy. And when we live within our means, we create stability for future generations. But when we abandon these principles in favor of quick fixes and false promises, we trade our long-term future for short-term illusions. It is like burning your furniture to stay warm for one night. You survive today, but you destroy the foundation of your home tomorrow. So I say to you, don't be fooled by the comforting lies. Don't believe that free money makes you free. Don't buy into the myth that printing wealth is the same as creating wealth. Real prosperity requires sacrifice, discipline, and responsibility. It requires you to see beyond the illusion of paper promises and to focus instead on building lasting value. Those who understand this will thrive when the illusion collapses. Those who don't will be left wondering how the dollar in their pocket lost its meaning. Let me begin by asking you this: if debt were the path to prosperity, why isn't every bankrupt person in the world living like a king? Why isn't every heavily indebted country the strongest and richest on the planet? The truth is obvious, but it is one that governments, central bankers, and even many ordinary people refuse to face. Debt may buy you time, but it always steals your future. It may give you the illusion of growth today, but it guarantees suffering tomorrow. And this is the trap we have walked into as a nation, believing that borrowing is a strategy for success rather than a recipe for collapse. Debt is seductive because it feels like freedom. When you borrow, you get to enjoy something now that you cannot yet afford. It feels good in the moment, like sugar in the bloodstream. But what happens when the bill comes due? What happens when the lender knocks on the door? That moment always arrives, and it arrives with a vengeance. On a personal level, debt shackles individuals, forcing them to trade years of their lives repaying what they once enjoyed. On a national level, debt enslaves entire populations because future generations are forced to pay for the recklessness of the present. And that is the trap we are in. Debt is not just about numbers on a balance sheet. It is about freedom versus slavery. A free man owns what he has earned. A slave works endlessly to repay what was borrowed. Today, the United States is no longer the free, self-reliant nation it once claimed to be. It is the world's biggest debtor, dependent on the kindness of strangers, foreign lenders, and central banks to keep its illusion alive. And when you depend on others to fund your lifestyle, you are no longer in control. You are at their mercy. That is not strength. That is weakness disguised as prosperity. Let me paint a clearer picture. Imagine a family that earns $50,000 a year but spends $80,000 to cover the gap they borrow on credit cards. At first, life looks good. They drive a nicer car. They eat at fancier restaurants. They take vacations. Friends envy them, thinking they are successful. But beneath the surface, their foundation is crumbling. Interest piles up, payments grow, and soon they are drowning. That is the U.S. economy in a nutshell. We live beyond our means, borrowing trillions to fund wars, welfare, and waste, while telling ourselves that we are wealthier than ever. But prosperity built on debt is as fragile as a house of cards. History has shown us time and again that nations collapse under the weight of debt. Ancient Rome debased its currency to pay for expansion, and it crumbled. Spain squandered its wealth on borrowed luxuries and lost its empire. Modern Argentina has defaulted repeatedly because it believed borrowing could replace building. And now the United States, the most indebted nation in history, stands on the same cliff. We are told not to worry. That debt is manageable. That deficits don't matter. But that is like telling a drowning man that water doesn't matter. The more we borrow, the deeper we sink until there is no escape. Here's what you need to understand. Borrowing is not a strategy. It is a delay tactic. It is pushing today's problems onto tomorrow's shoulders. And tomorrow always arrives, bringing with it pain far worse than what could have been faced honestly in the present. Real strength comes from discipline, from living within your means, from building savings instead of piling up obligations. Nations, like people, cannot cheat reality. If debt were the solution, then bankruptcy would be the path to success. But reality laughs at such illusions. So I urge you, look beyond the promises of politicians who say we can borrow endlessly without consequence. see the trap for what it is. Debt is not wealth. It is the chains that bind a nation, the weight that sinks an economy, the poison that destroys prosperity from within. And the sooner we break free from this illusion, the sooner we reclaim our freedom. Because make no mistake, the debt trap always closes. And when it does, only those who prepared will have the strength to rise above it. How many times in history has a fiat currency, one backed by nothing but government promises, survived forever? The answer is zero. Not one. Every single time, without exception, paper currencies have eventually collapsed under the weight of debt, corruption, and inflation. And yet people convince themselves that the U.S. dollar is somehow different, that it is immune to the same fate that has destroyed empires before us. But the truth is unavoidable. The downfall of the dollar is not a possibility to be debated. It is a certainty waiting to happen. The dollar has enjoyed a unique privilege as the world's reserve currency. It has been trusted, used, and hoarded by nations across the globe. But that trust was not built on empty promises. It was built on America's once sound economic foundation, on our productivity, our savings, our gold reserves, and the rule of law that inspired confidence. Today, that foundation has been replaced by mountains of debt, a printing press that never stops, and a political system addicted to spending more than it earns. When the foundation is gone, the structure cannot stand. The dollar is crumbling because the values that sustained it have been abandoned. Here's the hook. People think the dollar is strong because they compare it to other weak currencies, but strength is not relative. A weak man does not become strong simply because he is standing next to someone weaker. And yet this is the illusion the dollar rests on. It looks sturdy only because the euro, the yen, or the pound are also crumbling. But history shows us that when trust is broken, it doesn't matter what the alternatives are. The world abandons the failing system and seeks refuge in real value. That moment is coming for the dollar, and it will come faster than most people expect. Look at the evidence. Inflation is not a temporary blip. It is the inevitable outcome of decades of monetary abuse. Every dollar printed reduces the value of the dollars already in circulation. And as the government prints more to cover deficits, debts, and unfunded promises, the spiral accelerates. The rest of the world sees this. Foreign governments, foreign investors, even ordinary people in other countries are beginning to move away from the dollar. They are buying gold, forming trade agreements in other currencies, and seeking alternatives to a system they no longer trust. The very backbone of the dollar's dominance, the faith of the global community, is eroding before our eyes. When Rome's empire fell, it wasn't invaded in a single day. It collapsed slowly from within as its currency was debased and its people lost faith. The downfall of the dollar is following that same script. Every new bailout, every trillion-dollar deficit, every reckless spending program is another crack in the facade. And while many Americans are lulled into complacency because the collapse hasn't happened yet, history reminds us that when trust breaks, collapse feels sudden. One day the dollar will look stable, and the next, the world will wake up and realize it is nothing more than paper promises. The real danger is not just economic. It is psychological. The American people have been conditioned to believe the dollar is invincible. They have been told that it's different this time, that the government can manage the debt that the Federal Reserve can print without limit. But when reality hits, when the dollar loses its purchasing power and the world no longer accepts it as the standard, the shock will be devastating. And those who laughed at the warnings will be the ones crying in disbelief. Inevitability is not the same as immediacy, but inevitability means preparation is non-negotiable. The downfall of the dollar is baked into the system we've created. The timeline may be uncertain, but the outcome is not. And when it happens, those who held real assets, gold, silver, land, businesses that produce, will weather the storm, while those clinging to paper will be wiped out. The dollar's downfall is not just a warning, it is a call to action for anyone who refuses to be a victim of history repeating itself. When do the greatest fortunes in history get made? During times of calm or during times of chaos? The answer is clear. It is in the depths of crisis, when fear dominates and confidence disappears, that those who are prepared step forward and seize opportunities others are too blind or too scared to see. Every economic collapse, every currency failure, every financial panic creates two types of people: those who are destroyed by it and those who rise because of it. The choice between the two is not fate, it is preparation, perspective, and courage. Most people panic. They cling to the old system, hoping it will somehow recover. They hold on to paper wealth, trusting governments and central banks to restore stability. But history shows that this trust is always misplaced. Empires fall, currencies collapse, and systems that once seemed unshakable vanish almost overnight. The people who suffer are those who never questioned the illusion, who waited for someone else to save them. Yet, in the same moment, others thrive, not because the crisis didn't touch them, but because they positioned themselves to benefit from the shift. Crisis is the great reset button of wealth. It doesn't just destroy, it redistributes. When the dollar collapses, it will not simply vanish into the air. The wealth that evaporates for some will be transferred to others. Those holding assets of real value, gold, silver, land, productive businesses, will watch their relative wealth soar as paper money burns. It is not that they created new wealth in that moment, but that they preserved what mattered while others clung to what was never real in the first place. Think about the financial crisis of 2008. Millions of people lost their homes, their savings, their jobs. Yet at the same time, investors who anticipated the collapse, who saw the housing bubble for what it was, came out of the wreckage wealthier than before. They didn't create the crisis, but they used it. The same will be true in the collapse of the dollar. Most people will lose everything because they trusted paper promises. A smaller, wiser group will gain immensely because they trusted reality, real assets, real value, real wealth. Crisis also reveals character. When the system breaks, people show who they really are. Some freeze in fear, unable to act. Others lash out, blaming everyone but themselves. But a rare few rise above the chaos, not only preserving their own stability, but also building new opportunities in the ashes. Look at entrepreneurs who built great businesses during depressions. Look at investors who bought assets for pennies when everyone else was selling in panic. Their courage to act when others stood still became the foundation of their prosperity. That is the power of crisis. I want you to imagine the moment when the dollar collapses. Prices soar, savings evaporate, and the average person feels helpless. The air is filled with fear, but if you have prepared, if you hold gold, if you hold real assets, if you are free from the chains of debt, then while others are scrambling to survive, you are in position to thrive. You are not the victim of the storm. You are the sailor who charted the course before it hit. That is not luck. That is foresight. Crisis is not the end. It is the beginning. It is the bridge from one era to another, from one system to another, from one distribution of wealth to another. The downfall of the dollar will create immense suffering, yes, but it will also create the greatest opportunity of our lifetimes for those who are ready. The question is not whether the crisis will come. It will. The question is, will you be the one who is destroyed by it, or will you be the one who uses it to build lasting prosperity? The answer lies in the choices you make today. How many times has the system promised you security, stability, and prosperity, only to deliver inflation, debt, and disappointment? How many times have government officials, central bankers, and so-called experts assured you that everything was under control, that the economy was strong, that the dollar was safe, only for reality to expose those claims as lies? If history teaches us anything, it is that trusting the system is the fastest way to lose everything. The system was not built to protect you. It was built to protect itself. If you want true security, you cannot outsource your future to bureaucrats and politicians. You must take control yourself. The problem is that most people want to believe the system will save them. They want to believe that Washington has their best interests at heart, that the Federal Reserve can solve every crisis, that debt and money printing can continue forever without consequence. This belief is comforting, but it is fatal. It is like trusting the fox to guard the hen house. The system survives by keeping you passive, by keeping you dependent, by convincing you that you don't need to think for yourself. But here's the truth: the system doesn't care about you. It cares about power, about control, about preserving its own illusion. And when the collapse comes, it will sacrifice you without hesitation. The greatest danger you face is not the collapse of the dollar itself, but your blind faith in the very people causing that collapse. Every bailout, every stimulus check, every promise of temporary inflation is designed to keep you calm while the foundation beneath you erodes. They want you to sit still while they rob you through devaluation. They want you to keep your savings in dollars while they destroy its purchasing power. They want you to obey while they mortgage your future. But you are not powerless unless you choose to be. The moment you stop trusting the system and start trusting yourself, everything changes. You stop waiting for the government to solve problems it created. You stop believing that money printing makes you rich. You stop holding assets that can vanish overnight, and you start holding assets that endure: gold, silver, land, productive investments, skills that cannot be inflated away. You shift from being a dependent victim to being an independent actor. That mental shift is the most powerful step you can take, because once you see through the illusion, the system no longer controls you. Every great financial collapse in history blindsided the majority because they trusted authority instead of themselves. In 2008, countless people were told housing prices could never fall, that banks were stable, that the economy was sound. They believed it, and they lost everything. Meanwhile, those who thought for themselves, who saw the bubble, who didn't trust the system, came out wealthier and stronger. The same pattern is repeating now with the dollar. Most will cling to the illusion until it destroys them. A smaller few will question, prepare, and emerge on the other side with more freedom than ever before. When the dollar collapses, politicians will stand on stages promising new fixes. Central bankers will announce new programs to restore confidence. Experts on television will tell you not to panic, that everything is temporary. And most people will believe them because that's what they've always done. But if you have already broken free from trusting the system, you won't be fooled. You will act while others wait. You will preserve your wealth while others lose theirs. You will write your own future while others let the system erase it for them. Trusting the system is surrender. Trusting yourself is freedom. The system wants you to be obedient, dependent, and blind. But you don't have to be. You can think critically. You can prepare wisely. You can take responsibility for your future instead of handing it to people who have already proven they cannot be trusted. When the collapse of the dollar comes, and it will, those who trusted the system will be victims. Those who trusted themselves will be victors. The choice is yours, and it begins the moment you decide to stop believing the lies and start building your own path. When the dust settles after a financial collapse, do you want to be among those who lost everything or among those who saw it coming and turned the chaos into opportunity? That is the dividing line between victims and victors. Every crisis in history has created both millions who suffered because they weren't prepared and a smaller number who rose above it because they had the foresight to act before it was too late. The collapse of the dollar will be no different. The only question is which side of history you will stand on. Victims are created not by the crisis itself, but by their mindset before the crisis. They place blind faith in the system. They live paycheck to paycheck. They carry mountains of debt, and they keep their savings in dollars that are being devalued every single day. When the collapse finally arrives, they are shocked, confused, and helpless. They cling to false promises from politicians and central bankers, waiting for someone else to save them, not realizing that those very people were the ones who engineered the downfall. Victims are trapped because they refuse to see the truth until it was too late. You don't have to be a victim. You can choose to be a victor. Victors take responsibility for their future. They don't wait for the government to hand them security. They create their own. They don't measure wealth in paper currency. They measure it in assets that hold real value, regardless of what happens to the dollar. They use crisis as a stepping stone, not as a tombstone. The difference is not luck, it's preparation. It's the ability to see through the illusion and act decisively while others are still in denial. Think about those who prepared before the 2008 financial crisis. While the masses believed the housing bubble could never burst, a handful of people saw the reality and positioned themselves accordingly. When the crash came, millions were wiped out, but those few not only survived, they prospered. They became victors not because they were smarter than everyone else, but because they refused to ignore the warning signs. The collapse of the dollar is the next great test. And once again, the majority will lose because they trusted the system, but a prepared minority will thrive because they trusted themselves. Being a victor means thinking differently. While most people chase easy money, victors build real wealth. While others rack up debt to buy luxuries they cannot afford, victors invest in assets that generate income and preserve value. While the masses panic when inflation eats away their savings, victors hold gold, silver, land, and businesses that grow stronger in times of crisis. It's not about avoiding hardship altogether. It's about positioning yourself so that hardship works for you instead of against you. Victors don't fear collapse because they know collapse is the breeding ground of opportunity. I want you to picture this moment. The dollar collapses, prices soar, panic spreads across the country. News channels scream about chaos, markets swing wildly, and ordinary people line up outside banks wondering what went wrong. That's the victim's story. But somewhere else, someone who prepared is calm, even confident. Their wealth is preserved in hard assets. Their debt is minimal or non-existent. Their perspective is clear. While others scramble to survive, they are in a position to acquire more, to expand, to thrive. That's the victor's story. And the difference between the two is the choices made today before the storm hits. Here's the hook: you must remember being a victim is the default, but being a victor is a decision. It doesn't happen by chance. It doesn't happen by accident. It happens because you refuse to be blind, because you acted when others procrastinated, because you valued truth over comfort. When the downfall of the dollar arrives, it will not treat everyone equally. It will punish the unprepared and reward the prepared. Victims will look back and wish they had acted sooner. Victors will look forward, knowing they built their strength in the very moment when others lost theirs. The choice is yours, and the time to make it is now.